Louis, still whining, Louis. Right, so,
what T-shirt, Gary? Do you have a vampire-related T-shirt that's happening right now?
I do not actually have a vampire-related shirt. I've got shirts with blood themes, like I've got a Jason Voorhees shirt with machetes which have blood on them. I've got a I Survived the Red Wedding shirt, which has a bloody red tower with blood coming off of it. But no actual vampire shirts, so I should rectify that as well.
This is as close as I've got. I've got a Nancy Adams T-shirt.
Yep. Yeah, I'm going with Voldemort. I'm going with Voldemort.
Hey, Voldemort.
I am wearing an incredibly faded Spider-Man shirt.
He's not a vampire. Good Lord.
No, but he fights a living vampire.
Yes.
Morbius.
Yeah.
I love Morbius. I love
Morbius
the high
is
collar.
great.
The high collar and the deep V in the costume.
Yeah, we could do a whole panel about how Marvel wanted to do stuff with vampires and werewolves and zombies, but the 70s and the comics code wouldn't let them. So that's why they did Werewolf by Night, why Morbius was the living vampire.
Yeah. Guys, look, he's not dead, we swear. And then my favorite, though, is they had to make up a word for zombie.
Oh, yeah.
Zuvimbi, if I'm not mistaken.
Zuvimbi.
Zuvimbi. They couldn't say zombie, so they said Zuvimbi.
Was it the comics code that said they couldn't say zombie?
Yeah, but, well, if you remember, the comics code was mainly created to crush EC Comics.
Yeah.
And all the Vault of Horror and all the gruesome stuff. And the crime comics were kind of a side target as well. But it was mainly to put Bill Gaines out of business. So you couldn't have zombies, you couldn't have vampires, undead, anything too monstrous. So
Wow.
it's like the Hays Code. It was like a lot of things they started finding ways to get around them, which in some cases worked, because we got Morbius, who's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Morbius the Living Vampire Theater, starring
Jared Leto.
Thanks for coming to our thanks for attending our Morbius panel.
Yes.
little
I have to
5-minute
say,
panel.
Yeah.
I was already into watching that movie in general, and then that stinger at the end of the trailer with Michael Keaton, I was like, oh, what's this? What's this?
Mm-hmm.
I love it. So let's just do the panel that we said we were going to do, which is kind of the
80s and 90s vampires.
Thank you, 80s and 90s vampires, and we got a comment on our Facebook group saying the general complaint about vampires, there better not be any mention of sparkling. I said, was that the 90s? Was that the 80s? No, thank you.
No.
We don't talk about the 21st century in this track. It's ridiculous. Well, I guess
Not for one more year.
Yep.
Yeah.
Soon. Hello, Lola. Lola, Elvira is not an 80s vampire. She's a 80s goddess.
Thank you.
Yes.
I love her. I love her so much. Oh, and speaking of horror comics of the 70s, that's my Bernie Wrightson print right there, one of two.
Look at that. So tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about vampires from the 80s and also from the 90s. And here's the thing. We like to do, here on the American Sci-Fi Classics Track, lovely little panel gatherings. It's like you're at the Dragon Con, but we did not charge you $6 for a hamburger.
But we will if you'll let us.
Oh, yes.
A hamburger that was a hockey puck, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Num, num, num.
I guarantee you it will arrive in just as edible a condition through the mail as it would have been if you picked it up at the con.
Fresh. If you
I was going to say, you could mail it from Atlanta and there would be no appreciable difference in experience.
But let me just say, when you need a $6 burger, that thing's good.
I will tell you what, at 1:30 in the morning on a Saturday night, that's a tasty burger.
How much drinking have you done at that point, Gary?
My attorney has advised me not to answer that question on grounds of inebriation.
My attorney
How much
advised
alcohol have you had?
Not. Well, ladies and gentlemen,
What do they call one of those big bottles? A fifth?
So, ladies and gentlemen, here are your panelists. 75% of us you've seen before on these quarantine panels. So let's introduce our brand new to the quarantine panel arena, Mr. J.C. Torre.
Hello.
Introduce yourself, sir.
I am J.C. Torre, and I am the creator of the audio fiction podcast Vampires of Whitechapel, which follows the story of FBI agent Ariana Grayson, who is on the hunt for serial killer Alistair the Annihilator, only to discover that he is a vampire sired by Jack the Ripper. Our motto is make vampires scary again. And our show is available on most podcast platforms or at vampiresofwhitechapel.transmissionsfromatlantis.com. That's me.
Oh my gosh! I had no idea you were doing that.
Oh, really? We've got
That
two.
sounds amazing.
Yeah, we've actually got two shows. We got that one, and we got Continuum Force as well, which is kind of like Stargate meets Ancient Aliens meets Doctor Who. So,
well, we're going to post all the links to all the things that all of us are doing, so that all of you out there watching can consume.
Yes. And as a refresher, Michael, tell people who you are.
Oh yeah.
who's that guy?
Sure.
The guy over there.
Novelist. I wrote a 5-book vampire and urban fantasy series called The Withrow Chronicles about a fat guy who lives in suburbia and also happens to be the vampire lord of North Carolina, and discovers that he has to save the world. And that was a lot of fun. And the first book is called Perishables, and in each one I mashed them up with a different genre. So, like, one is vampires and zombies, one of them is vampires and superheroes, one of them is vampires and rednecks, things like that.
That sounds cool.
So rednecks are a genre?
Rednecks are a genre.
genre?
They're their own genre.
Okay.
Yes.
It's a better way to describe the book than to say vampires and my relatives. So, let's not talk about how many of my relatives I killed off in that book. Yes,
was it cathartic? I bet it was cathartic.
It was very cathartic. But you can find all of my stuff at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com or facebook.com/michaelgwilliamsauthor.
And you, sir, the co-director of American Sci-Fi Classics Track, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gary Mitchel.
Hi, everybody. I like vampires.
Yep.
I haven't written anything about them. I haven't written anything about them, but I do enjoy them quite a lot. And I especially love, though, JC, your motto of make vampires scary again, because let's kind of get the panel kicked off on that. The 80s is when they started changing. I mean, vampires have always been a highly sexual creature.
Yes.
I mean, in Dracula, he's pretty much a representation of lust. So there's always been a sex angle, but it was always kind of a forbidden. It's like this is the dangers of sex and what raw passion will do to you. And then the 80s, it became, like The Hunger and, hey, vampires are hot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lost Boys did a lot for that. Young Kiefer
did.
Oh, yeah. So maybe one of the two of you would like to tee off on that.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Mike.
That shift.
I think that partly it's because, so I am often unnecessarily academic, and so I'm just going to dive right into that. I think that part of the reason why vampires in the 80s transitioned from being solely scary monsters to being scary, sexy monsters is that the 80s was a time when sex was very scary for a lot of people. You have the beginning of the HIV epidemic. You have the beginning of a more public awareness of AIDS and of the responsibilities, the risks that are involved in sex and things like that. And I feel like that was a time when there was a lot of anxiety around sex and sexuality. And it was also sort of coming off culturally, psychologically, like the end of the freewheeling 70s and the idea of like, let's just go to a club and do all the drugs and then whatever happens, happens. And I feel like those two combinations like come together to make vampires in the 80s a really fascinating study and like what we want, we know also will probably kill us. And it's beyond just sex. Like the 80s is when there started to be like really organized stop smoking campaigns, for instance. And really organized campaigns around like things like wearing seatbelts and not drinking and driving, and stuff where a lot of things that are sort of in the American mindset are associated with freedom and pleasure and fun. Also, we started being told, don't do that because it will probably get you killed. And I think this is one of the ways that manifested in our culture.
Yep, and I think for me, there's always been an element of sex with vampires. Even if you go back to the old days with Christopher Lloyd and all the classic vampire movies that we remember from the 60s and 70s, there was always that kind of intimacy of when the vampire bites the damsel in distress's neck. There was almost that sexual kind of implication of that. And I think when it transitioned into the 80s, and because they wanted to kind of refresh the vampire genre, because everybody's seen Dracula a billion different ways. They wanted to make it vampires accessible to young people again. So that's why you had things like The Lost Boys and things like The Hunger and a few of these other vampire movies that were definitely geared towards the younger audience. And and that particular time, the younger audience, like Michael said, there was concerns about HIV, so there was kind of like that little scary mystery to it. But at the same time, it's like, wow, these guys look really cool. They're look at Kiefer Sutherland. He's like badass looking kind of dude, and that kind of and look at Bill. Bill is like now he's a vampire. What's going on here? So when you have things like that, it's just it adds that sort of mystique to it. And then when you throw in the stuff that happened in the 90s with like Anne Rice's The Interview with a Vampire with Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, two beautiful individuals that they at the time were at their apex of power in regards to Hollywood, and they commanded the sexual attention to it, and I think it just kind of morphed into that. Now I think it led to bad things down the line, but where it went too far the other way. But I think that at that point in time, it was kind of like a really good mix.
And I feel like in Interview with the Vampire, that moment when Lestat turns Louis is such a very erotically charged moment, but it is also a moment of genuine horror because it's sort of the culmination of all of that. It is somebody giving in to the danger. It's somebody saying, I know that this is going to kill me, and I'm okay with that. And that's like the next step beyond it might kill me. It's a very, very distressing and beautifully filmed scene.
It's also kind of tragic if you think about it, because Louis is in such a bad state of mind where he just doesn't give a darn. I don't know what the rules are here, Gary, if I can curse or not here, so I'll censor myself. But yeah, he doesn't care. So when Lestat takes him, it's kind of like it's very tragic in a way where it's almost like he's committing suicide to his mortal life.
Yeah, and it's a moment when the predation is psychological as much as it is physical. Lestat knows he's taking advantage of somebody in a weakened state.
We have another panelist that has arrived. Ladies and gentlemen, you've seen him upon the Classic Track live in person, but this is the first time that he is on our quarantine panel. Ladies and gentlemen, Jonathan Williams. How are you, sir?
Hey, in true Dragon Con American Sci-Fi Classics Track fashion, I have been drinking.
Yay!
I've got my glass of red wine.
That's the best panel.
I do not drink wine.
I kind of forgot about this. I have some really cool next door neighbors, and I was over there, and then I saw Gary's message, so here I am.
Hey!
Yeah. So they had alcohol and you left? Come on.
That's the power of classic.
They're going to be up for a while, so as soon as we're done, if you hear, I think they just started karaoke.
Oh
so
boy!
If you hear that in the background, that's next door.
It'll actually be like at con where there's a band playing in one of the ballrooms.
And this has been much of my quarantine has been staying up very late, much like vampires, with my next door neighbors.
I gotta say, if you could get them to karaoke the "Sexy Sax Man" song from Lost Boys right now, that would be.
I saw that guy. He played. I don't know if any of you were there. He played the night before Dragon. Well, I saw you that night, Gary. He played at the Masquerade that Wednesday or Thursday before Dragon Con, and I was like, "Why are you not at Dragon Con?" I mean, he had a pretty good crowd.
Should have been. He
totally
had a huge crowd.
Should have been. And our buddy and Classic Track irregular Ryan Cadaver opened for him.
Yeah,
at that show.
Exactly. Yep.
That's just how cool Ryan is. And I'm going to tell his story right now because he's not here to tell it himself. He went for, I think it was his honeymoon. He and his wife went to Transylvania. They did a European tour, but they went to Transylvania. They went to Dracula's castle. And in the room with the coffin and everything, and this would be where they go. They had a poster, not of Bela Lugosi, not of Christopher Lee. They had a poster of Kiefer.
Of course it is.
Nice.
That's amazing.
I love
it. That's the power of the 80s vampire.
So in addition to we touched briefly upon the reason for the transition into the sexiness of vampires. And Jonathan, do you remember when it changed, when it went from vampires are Christopher Lee and Bela Lugosi to vampires are Tom Cruise? Like, what was the Michael Williams up in the right corner, my right, your left, I don't know. He said that it was the times, it was the 80s and the AIDS and the prohibition on things that we had enjoyed with abandon before then.
Yeah, I heard a lot of that, and I don't disagree. But I feel like I've read Dracula. It's been a while, but I don't remember thinking the book was all that sexy, aside from like the 3 brides of Dracula and stuff like that. But even that was a little more horrific than it's been portrayed usually in film.
Sure.
I mean, I think Bela Lugosi and Christopher Lee and Gary Oldman and all that, Nosferatu even to some extent, there is some sexiness. There's always been some sexuality there, some like an erotic tone, even though it is sometimes very horrific as well. But definitely the 80s, like I said, I heard some of what you were saying with AIDS and all that kind of stuff emerging, made it very taboo. So presumably vampires are immune to that, I would guess.
Well, I guess
it depends on which version you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think that was addressed somewhere. I forget where, like in a comic book or something, where a vampire drank AIDS-infected blood and had some sort of reaction. I don't remember where that was, though.
Somebody in the comments, Google that.
Yeah, and I remember.
We'll figure this out.
Yeah, and I think in the role-playing game Vampire the Masquerade, which also had a huge impact on the whole power and sexiness of the vampires, had a thing of like if a vampire wanted to get drunk or high, they had to get a person drunk or high and then drink their blood and kind of get like secondhand buzz.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and also in that game, vampires can acquire diseases, illnesses from blood that carries those vectors. That blood, if that blood is a vector of transmission, then they can, acquire whatever the illness in question is. And so in Vampire the Masquerade, it was explicitly possible for a vampire to acquire HIV and eventually develop a full-blown AIDS, but never die. They would just suffer the consequences forever.
That's just science.
Yeah.
But these days, they just need to find somebody who's on a good cocktail of anti-HIV drugs and
yeah,
training them.
when was the first time for you guys that you encountered in a book or a TV show or a movie a vampire who was a good guy? We talked about this briefly as we started, so I've already basically said mine, but go ahead.
I have an answer, but I always talk too much.
All right, JC, you're up.
Oh, shoot.
Your time in the barrel.
Oh, man. A good guy. For me, it's kind of weird because...
Or maybe just the protagonist. Maybe not.
I always viewed Lestat as a good guy, even though he's not. He's an evil, self-centered son of a gun, but I always thought of him as the hero of Interview with a Vampire, simply because he is the one that kind of brings in Louis. Louis suicidal. He wants to kill himself. He brings in Louis to a new and amazing new life as a vampire. And then when Louis is not happy as a vampire, because Louis is never happy, he brings Claudia, as his companion. And, to me, that's something that's it shows a little bit of heart that you wouldn't expect somebody that's lived, 300, 400 years, however Lestat has lived, long he's lived, to really care about, and in the end, it's all about himself. He wants everything around him to be happy so that he can enjoy life and live it to the fullest. But it kind of, to me, when I watched those movies when I was a kid, it always kind of made me think that Lestat was the hero of the movie.
Well, he's certainly the protagonist, and of the two main vampires, or the two main male vampires, I guess I should say, because Claudia is definitely a main character. Lestat is interesting, and you want to get to know him, even though he is kind of a jerk. And Louis just wants to be whiny all the time. Yes. Forever. And It's like, would you just get over it?
Louis.
Yeah. I mean, and it got to that. That kind of infected the role. I'm going to talk about the role-playing game probably far too much. I can tell already. But I love that game. It's very much a product of the 90s. But there were too many people who got into it for one of two reasons. It was, one, to be the powerful vampire. I'm going to mess everybody up. I'm going to eat everybody who annoys me. Or the chunk. Oh, the angst of being immortal. Oh, I'm drawn to have to drink blood. Oh, well, would you stop it?
Oh, the Morrissey albums.
Yes. Yeah, you're either a Pantera album or a Morrissey album. Pick one.
Yeah.
I think my first vampire good guy, though, was probably in I, Vampire, an 80s comic from Marvel about a vampire who hunted other vampires. They recently brought him back. I don't know how well he's doing. I've been out of touch with the comic scene for about 2 years, 3 years now, 4 years. God. Anyway, a while. But yeah, that was it. And I think he started off it was either House of Secrets or House of Mystery. Yeah, so he was a DC guy. I'm sorry, he was a DC guy. And he hunted evil vampires with the goal of hopefully one day, doing enough good works and whatever.
I think my first one was Nick Knight from Forever Knight.
Oh, yeah. How could I forget Nick Knight? Of course.
After having watched that TV show, I encountered a series of novels called The Vampire Files by Pat Elrod, P.N. Elrod, which are about an unwilling vampire journalist in gangland Chicago, who is the hero and a good guy. But I didn't read any of those novels until after I had watched Forever Knight. Because P.N. Elrod also wrote a couple of novels that were Forever Knight novels. But Forever Knight, Nick Knight, the story of a vampire who decides to not just stop being bad, but try to become a force for good. And he's a Canadian cop, so that's a little more believable. But, the show is so incredibly sweet in many ways. But also, it includes really vicious vampires. And I think it's a really fun a really fun approach to talking about how does somebody who's been really bad decide to be good. You know, in the same way that Xena talks about that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I feel like vampires are a really rich source of material for that sort of story.
And Rick Springfield was the original Nick Knight, right? Wasn't he?
Correct. In the original pilot.
The TV movie.
Yeah, he was in the pilot. Then he decided he didn't want to live in Canada and film at night for the next however long it was going to be.
Forever Night contains one of my favorite scenes I've ever seen in any vampire fiction on film, and it's where Nick Knight has to go testify in court for a case that he's involved in, and of course it's court, so it's during the day. So he has to. They come up with some reason to like draw the blinds in the courtroom or something, but there is like sunlight like creeping across the handrail of the witness stand as he's like standing there giving his testimony, and he keeps like inching away from it. And it's just a really fun, weird, funny scene that shows that somebody like actually sat there and thought, okay, what would happen? You know, so it's a really interesting take.
And I loved his the guy who turned him. I can't remember his name right now, but who did the Nightcrawler radio show and was the completely unrepentant evil vampire. I hate them, so what? He was great. I loved him. He's like, Nick, why are you torturing yourself like this? Just eat them.
Hang on for a second. I've got a message from the Peanut Gallery about Rick Springfield as Forever Night. Solid gold.
Well done.
Solid gold.
This is why we love you, Lola.
Come on, Gary, sing it.
I wish that I ate Jesse's girl. How about you, Jonathan? Who was your first vampire hero?
Well, I've never seen that. Now I'm going to look it up. But I guess the first one that comes to mind is Blade. I just read this maybe 2 or 3 years ago, but it came out, I think, in the 90s. Nancy Collins, Sonia Blue books. Like
Those
Sunglasses
really
After Dark and all. And I think there was some connection with Vampire the Masquerade at some point with that, some crossover. But that was definitely a kind of anti-hero character, I guess. I can't really think of... Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No.
I mean, I think because of the nature of vampires, even when a vampire is the protagonist, there's still elements of evil there that either the character's struggling with or trying to suppress or something like that. So definitely with Sonya Blue and Blade, that's definitely an element of those characters.
Yeah, that's an angle, I think, that a lot of where the hero is a vampire becomes... Oh, thank you, Sherman Burris. It was Lacroix. Lacroix turned Nick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Lucien Lacroix.
Yeah, great character.
Like the sparkling water?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. He's not a vampire. He's just held next to a vampire. Like Lacroix. It's not actually tastes like strawberry. It was next to a strawberry. Anyway. But no, I think a lot of the vampire fiction where they try to make the vampire sympathetic is they tend to downplay that a little too much. Like, oh yeah, it's fine. I just resist it and I'm okay. And really don't push that. Which is why I like you with JC with the make them scary again. Because that was a part of, I think, the 80s and 90s was the whole toning that down, turning them into more sympathetic characters. And I'll throw one out there to see what you guys think of this movie, Near Dark, where the main character is a guy, he gets turned, and the whole movie is basically him trying to unturn.
I regret to say that Near Dark is on the list of things that I have not seen.
Oh,
yeah.
I'll see myself out.
Michael, go.
Joe, I want to watch this movie with you so badly.
We can do that. We can totally
this
do
movie. Let me just pitch it to you this way. What if instead of sexy, sleek creatures of the night, vampires were in fact meth-addled redneck scumbags cruising the back roads of America in their Winnebago, doing horrible things to people because that's the most creative they can be as people. It's an amazing movie. It is so well done. It's like 2/3 of the cast of Aliens because it was, all of a sudden I blanked on her name. The woman who directed Hurt Locker.
Catherine
Bigelow?
Catherine,
yeah.
Maybe.
She was married to James Cameron at the time, I think, and so met a bunch of those people while they were making Aliens, and then wanted to make this movie about vampires that were rednecks, and they went off and made Near Dark afterwards, and it's so exquisitely good. It is one of the scariest vampire movies I've ever watched. There is absolutely zero about these vampires that is admirable or like desirable or sympathetic at all. They are monsters through and through, and it is so dedicated to just like reveling in that about them and just never letting you feel sympathy for them for a moment. They are horror creatures, and it is so well done. It is just exceptionally clever, and it is like chock full of clever ideas about how vampires would get around, how vampires would survive, how they would pass in mortal society. Just like, it is so smart. It is one of the best vampire films ever made.
And it never uses the word vampire.
Right.
Wow. That blows my mind. You guys have mentioned it many times when we've done vampire panels, and because apparently I'm lazy, I never, to this point, gone out and obtained and viewed this thing that you guys have bragged about for a lot, often, very often. But what about, on the subject of television vampires, briefly, a show came into my mind when you mentioned Forever Night. Going back a little ways, then I realized this happened. I think we lost Mr. Jonathan, but
he'll be back. Vampire's got it.
There he comes.
He needed a refill.
In the 70s and the 80s, there were a lot of vampire-related things for little kids. Like there was a live-action show called The Monster Squad before the actual movie Monster Squad. And there was the Groovy Ghoulies somebody mentioned, which had a vampire in it. And my personal favorite from the 80s, the Drac Pack.
My God, I forgot about Drac Pack.
Which was just...
I've never heard of this.
It was not good, but it was like a filmation thing with the children of the monsters. So there was like a kid Dracula and a teenage Dracula, a teenage Frankenstein guy, a teenage Wolfman. But the singular thing they did that is most memorable is they had a battle cry that when they went into action, they would say, "Drac Pack, let's whack." And then they would do a simultaneous high five with each other. And I thought, this is the greatest television thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like many cartoons of the 70s and 80s, it was a blatant ripoff of the Scooby-Doo formula. But how do we make it instead of a dog? What do we do?
Instead of a dog. And there was a Wolfman in it. So, see, that was...
When I hear teenage vampire, I imagine like a vampire with a skateboard and like little bat wings on his shoulders, being like, "Yeah, Dad, well, I like sunlight."
I'm growing garlic, Dad. You can just deal with it.
I'm not going to
go to Olive Garden.
That's fine. They don't use garlic anyway.
I don't care if I catch on fire.
But a lot of the 70s and 80s, though, which is kind of tangenting off that, is people were trying to subvert vampires, like The Hunger, which was trying, again, sexing them up, trying to make them, make them less monstrous, but yet still monstrous.
Life Force. Life Force is another great one that you go into it thinking it's a sci-fi movie, and it's all about vampires, and it just sneaks up on you, and it was a really well done movie. I actually really liked it.
Oh yeah. Shout Factory has done a wonderful collector's edition of it that you can pick up. But Patrick Stewart's in it.
Mm-hmm.
Who else?
Yeah, he had hair. Oh my god!
Yeah.
He had hair in that movie.
I don't know if I'm prepared for that. I also, speaking of sneaking up on you, Salem's Lot. Well, reading that, assuming it was about witches.
Yeah.
No. No, there's it's vampires. I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I came into a book called Salem's Lot looking for witches, but no.
Yeah, Salem's Lot.
Different Salem.
Yeah, Salem's Lot was actually one of the first Stephen King books that I read. It was huge, and yeah, I mean, it actually caught me by surprise too. I did not expect vampires in it, and it was actually really well done. It's one of my favorite Stephen Kings.
Yeah, but I still have somewhere my paperback from that era where it was a gloss black cover with a woman's, like a statue face with a blood drop like coming just out of the corner of the mouth. And it was like, oh, this is creepy. I got to read this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm particularly susceptible to any version of kids get turned into the monster of the movie. Yeah. And so that's one that really works on that. Lots of vampire movies have that, but that always works on me. And I remember, I don't even remember if it's in the movie, but I remember like seeing a cover for Salem's Lot or something where there was a kid vampire and just being horrified.
Yeah, it's one of the big scenes in the movie is like the kid's 7-year-old buddy floating outside his window going, let me in.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
That's from every winter our friend Becky does memes about if you're cold, they're cold. And she does it with vampire scenes. And she does one with that kid going, awesome. But what about I had a thought and it is gone. Somebody else talk. I don't know if I was
How about the count from Sesame Street?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He was non-threatening. Why was there a vampire on Sesame Street?
What did you guys think of vampire comedies? You know, like Once Bitten.
I loved Once Bitten.
You know, there was and Buffy the Vampire Slayer was actually a comedy, even though that wasn't Joss Whedon's original vision. But when they actually did it as a film, it was an actual comedy. You know,
and a comedy with actually scary, unsympathetic vampires who were monsters.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Except for Paul Rubin's character, where he's going.
Yeah.
That movie resurrected Paul Rubin's career. And God bless him.
Yeah.
And sidebar, he plays that vampire again on What We Do in the Shadows.
I know that. Oh yes.
Yeah,
It's only
that one. If you don't watch anything else, find on YouTube that scene from the TV show What We Do in the Shadows, where everyone who has ever played a vampire is in it playing that vampire. It's got Trejo, it's got Wesley Snipes, it's got Tilda Swinton. Even outside the context of the show, it's hilarious.
So good.
What was the vampire movie with Jim Carrey? He was a high school kid.
I think that was Once Bitten, wasn't it?
No, wasn't Once Bitten the one with George Hamilton?
No, you're thinking of Love at First Bite.
Yeah,
okay.
I thought Once Bitten was the guy who's in everything, and never mind, I'll remember his name in a second. Keep going.
So was Once Bitten? Anywho, Transylvania 65000.
Yes.
There you go. Okay, Once Bitten is the one with Jim Carrey that I.
Okay, there you go. No, I dug it. I'm not sure if this covers our 80s or that. There was a Dracula Dead and Loving It, which was kind of the end of the funny Leslie Nielsen movies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that one.
There's a great staking scene, which is just all set up, where there's a lady in a white dress. And the human guy thinks she's a vampire, so he goes in to stake her. and she's in a white dress, and the room is white, and he has the stake, and it's maybe a 5-minute scene of him deciding whether or not to stake her or not. And then when he finally does, red goo everywhere. An explosion of red. And it is so worth it for that one scene. But what about
riff on the Coppola's Dracula, which came in the mid-90s, which gorgeous film. Visually gorgeous. But I think Michael has problems with it.
Okay.
So, Dracula is my favorite novel of all time, and that is a really, really beautiful, carefully done, magnificently crafted adaptation of that novel, except for the whole bit about her being his wife from a past life. That is totally stitched on. It is not even stitched on. It's like glued on with like knockoff crazy glue that wears off on a hot day. It is totally manufactured for the movie, and it just ruined it for me. But chock full of great performances, beautifully created, and I think that it is possible that almost 30 years later I could enjoy the movie again if I got drunk enough first.
Maybe.
The funny thing about that one is that was the first time I actually realized Keanu Reeves was a really good actor.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people at the time gave him crap, and I was like, "You not seeing the same movie I'm watching?"
Yeah.
Because it's a very understated performance.
Mm-hmm.
It just kind of it's sort of, maybe that was the first time that we had seen Keanu Reeves do anything except Bill and Ted.
Yeah.
Mm.
And
he hadn't done Matrix yet at that point, right?
No.
Yeah, Matrix was years later.
Yeah.
But yeah, and the creepy Gary Oldman Dracula. Oh my gosh.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. Great performance.
Yes.
Amazing performance.
Yeah, Gary Oldman made a movie for me.
I have crossed oceans of time. Like, oh, okay, I'll marry you. Come on, let's go.
Yes. and just the look of Dracula when he's the Count, with the hair and all that kind of crazy look that he had, and then when he's normal Gary Oldman with steampunk Gary Oldman, it's kind of like, wow, how does he go from one to the other just drinking blood? Wow, that's damn Drac.
And in the novel, Stoker described Dracula once he gets to England and starts drinking blood on the regular, I guess, since he's drained half of Transylvania. He describes him as a dandy. And I really thought that was, and it's one of the very few physical descriptions of Dracula in the New World that's in the book. And I thought that they did such a great job of turning Gary Oldman into this kind of dandy-ish villain. He's very stylish. He cares a lot about how he looks. And that's very Dracula.
Yeah. And Lola in the comments made a great point about the way that his shadow creeps on the wall. That always freaks me out every time I see it. It's such a cool effect.
Yeah, I think the moment when I was watching it that sold him for me is there at the beginning when Keanu has cut himself shaving and Dracula takes the razor from him and turns around and does the
Yeah, such a good one.
Although I do have to tell one of the funniest stories of when I went to go see that with a friend. It was like the third time I'd seen it. I loved the movie. And I'm watching it with a friend of mine in a nearly empty theater, but it gets the scene when after the lady has died. And it cuts to her in the glass coffin in the white dress. And I just lean over to my friend and I go, wouldn't that make a great coffee table? He bust out laughing, almost fell on the floor. And I heard two guys behind us going, look at the white boy, look at the white boy. So to this day, I still want to do that. I want to get a glass coffin and put a dummy in there.
Yeah, you got to do that. Always. What about can we spend about 3 hours talking about Blade, please?
Oh yeah.
I love that movie. I loved it just from knowing that he was an obscure Marvel superhero at first, and then I saw the movie and I thought, hey, it doesn't matter that no one knows that he's an obscure Marvel superhero. He's a whole new thing. Everybody should love Blade. And that first movie is terrific. And
I was just going to say, I think it was also one of the first successful Marvel movies, wasn't it?
Yes. It was
because that was before Iron Man and everything.
It was the second one theatrically.
Yeah.
Jonathan?
That was before X-Men, I think, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Several years
before X-Men. And I kept wishing somehow they could work him in. Well, I think Wesley Nice was unfortunately incarcerated for a while, but after that, now he's out now. Come on, guys. But before everything went to hell, but they have announced, Blade's coming, and the guy who played Cottonmouth. Yeah.
And Luke Cage is going to be. I am looking forward to that.
I am too. But I guess I didn't remember from the comics that Blade was half vampire, but they leaned into that in the movie, and just everything about Wesley Snipes' performance, just classic. And Chris Christopherson, I remembered him from albums that my mother had, but I didn't know how cool he was until he was in this movie. And so good.
Yeah.
Snipes, it was one of those perfect pairings of character and actor, because he really just did such a great performance.
He owned it.
That was, the whole, your world's just a candy coating topping. Is a line that sticks in my head. And he had the kung fu moves. And I remember when I went to go see it in the theater. Same friend I saw Dracula with, by the way. After the blood rave ended, I just leaned over to him and I went, "Look, the rest of the movie can suck. I don't care. That was perfect. That was worth the price of admission."
Yep.
Yeah. There's I think it's the third one in Blade Trinity where there's the kind of new monster that can turn vampires into.
Yes. That was a creepy monster, man.
Oh,
that was
such a great movie
ever. Yeah.
Yeah. And the idea that these monsters who are so accustomed to being able to be the top of the food chain have something to be afraid of is fantastic. And there's some great scenes where, there's the scene where they slice up one of the ones that has been converted, and just the part of its face that has one eye is a chunk of flesh off on the side, and that eye is still blinking. And that's when they find out that they basically can't kill these things with anything other than sunlight. It is amazingly creepy. It is so scary. Plus, that movie has Parker Posey, which automatically makes it good.
100% correct. Yes.
And isn't that the one where Ryan Reynolds was talking or was speaking with the little Pomeranian that turns into one of those crazy vampire things?
Yeah, Ryan Reynolds, who apparently in interviews has said he ad-libbed 70% of his lines because a little inside baseball, but apparently Wesley Snipes and the director did not get along at all. And so he would just not show up to film the scenes that were supposed to be him and Ryan Reynolds talking. So they would just put the camera on Reynolds, and the director said, "Talk for about 10 minutes. We'll use what we can." So a good chunk of his dialogue is him just riffing.
Yeah, that Ryan Reynolds is the riffing Ryan Reynolds in my opinion.
I love since I saw Blade, and for the rest of my life, anytime anyone says, "Hey, how are you feeling today?" I'm always going to say, "Like hammered shit." I will not stop.
Yes.
Well, the one thing I will say is that I think we'd be remiss of having a Vampires 80s and 90s panel without talking about Quentin Tarantino's From Dusk Till Dawn.
100% agreed.
Because, I mean, it's Tarantino, number one, and pretty, at least in my personal opinion, I love Tarantino's style of filmmaking, but just the way that he kind of reinvented the vampire genre and telling it from the point of view of just these random dudes that just drive into some hideout to try to get away from the police, and they just fall into this crazy vampire haven of nuttiness.
They don't explain it at all.
Yes.
It's just first you think it's a murder movie road trip, and then bam, vampires.
Yeah, Robert Rodriguez, Quentin Tarantino teaming up is always going to be magic. And in this, there are very few movies that do a genre shift that hard, that deep into a movie, and it still work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because
it's almost built on the zombie movie model.
Yeah.
Of like, these are the people who did not know they were in a monster movie, and now they are surrounded by the monsters and must survive.
That's a great point, Michael. Yes, absolutely.
And it's got some great moments of play off that, like when Clooney says, "Okay, I don't believe in vampires. Vampires aren't real, but these things are fucking vampires." Or the scene with the daughter with Julia Lewis, where she's like, "Or the silver works on them." No, it doesn't. Yes, it does. She goes, "Do any of us have any silver?" No, then who cares?
Yes, and I will never ever forget Cheech Marin's dialogue. I'm not going to stay here, but I think we all know what we're talking about if you've seen that movie.
Like, I don't think I could repeat any words he says from that movie in the panel room at Dragon Con, but wow, they're iconic.
Yes.
And apparently Cheech said that he completely ripped that off from somebody he heard doing that spiel in L.A.
Oh my gosh, really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
That's a yikes.
Yeah.
Jonathan, from Dusk Till Dawn, we'll start with you. Who's your favorite character in that movie?
It's been a while since I've seen it, but wasn't it Tom Savini that had the belt buckle gun thing?
Yeah, sex machine.
Yes.
I really like that.
I didn't know. I'm watching it and I go, "Oh my gosh, that's Tom Savini!" And my wife leans over and says, "Who is Tom Savini?"
And you divorced her right then, right?
Right then. But and then the blaxploitation guy,
Fred Williams.
Fred the Hammer Williamson. So good. Basically basically playing Blade in Dusk Till Dawn.
Yeah.
70s Blade. But so good. Just everything about it. And what I think I liked most about it was it combined like 5 other vampire genres and 5 other action movie genres and just smooshed them all together. And it was chaos. I loved it.
Yeah, and it has one of the greatest endings in movie history.
Mm-hmm.
I love the whole bit when the girl goes to go with George Clooney. He goes, "No, I might be an asshole, but I'm not a effing asshole. I'm not dragging you into this light." But when it pans to the back and the camera just pulls back and we see the bar is atop of an Aztec temple, I was just like, "Oh my God, I want so much more of this world."
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they gave it to us and it was not good.
Yeah. Well, one of the sequels had Bruce Campbell, and that's all I'm going to say for it.
I did think the sequel that had the bank robbery kind of gone awry.
I think that's the third one, Hangman's Daughter.
Was that the one with
something like that? That was another instance of them trying to do an interesting genre mashup. I'm not going to say that it was good. I'm going to say that it was an interesting idea.
It was.
How many sequels were there?
I think 3.
At 3.
And a TV show.
Yeah, and a TV show.
I remember that.
Show, yeah. I hear the TV show is good, but I haven't watched it.
Yeah.
Dusk Till Dawn 3, Hangman's Daughter. That was the origin story of Selma Hayek's character in the first one.
Ooh. Did she play herself in Hangman's Daughter?
No, I think they got somebody else.
Yeah. By that point, the budget got slashed.
We can't do an 80s, 90s vampires panel without talking about Fright Night.
Oh, God. Thank you.
I forgot about that one.
Yes.
That's my favorite.
Roddy McDowell. Rules.
Yeah, any movie with Roddy McDowell is an instant win. But that was also for me the one where everybody, like I'd said earlier, like for Lost Boys and other 70s, 80s stuff, like Vamp with Grace Jones, everybody was trying to do a new spin on vampires and a new way to update it. And for me, Fright Night was the movie that went, no. The classic vampire still works. Because he's the classic vampire. He's charismatic. He's charming. He has to be invited in. He's suave. He's got so many great. I mean, I love that movie. I love Jerry Dandridge. He's one of my favorite vampires.
Yep.
Chris Sarandon. He's so good. And his familiar, which we still don't know what the hell he is, was cool. And it's got some great scenes, like you have to have one of my favorite moments in vampire movies, where Roddy's coming after him with the cross, and he's like, "You have to have faith for that to work." Laughing at him. And again, this is why you hire Roddy McDowall. The way you see the resolve, and he does it again, and then why you could hire Christopher Sarandon when he goes.
Christopher Sarandon is so charismatic in that movie and so dangerous while also looking so ordinary. I mean, like, he spends like what's supposedly the sexiest seduction scene of the movie, like wandering around an exceptionally not disco-y disco in a gray sweater. Like he's just like, he looks like he just got off from work as a job as like an accountant at a banking firm that's like in the middle. It's not a big bank. It's not a little bank. And it still works. He's still dangerous and sexy.
Is there
an Evil Ed?
And Evil Ed.
You're
Who has
so
had a complicated career.
Yeah.
Let's talk about vampire movies or vampire things. We don't really have to stick with movies. You went in with high expectations, but then they didn't pay off. Everybody has one of those.
For me, it was Lair of the White Worm. Everybody had told me how great of a movie it was, and it was one of the ultimate vampire films, and I just didn't get it. It just didn't hit for me. I mean, obviously, it had a younger Peter Capaldi in it, which was kind of cool, but other than that, it just didn't hit for me. I don't know why.
Yeah, although I have a friend who lives in England. He has the bust of the snake head from that movie, just because he happened to be passing by where they had filmed the place and they were taking it apart. And they were like, "Hey, you want this?" Sure.
Oh, cool. Wow.
But yeah, that one I remember watching it just being bored.
Yeah,
it's a movie that really just sort of loses you.
Yeah.
How about you, Jonathan?
I don't think I've seen that, and nothing's really coming to mind.
What's your this is going to be great, it wasn't kind of movie? Or what's your favorite vampire movie from that era?
Fright Night, even though I'd forgotten about it, is probably one of them. I think we also should mention John Carpenter's Vampires and 30 Days of Night. I don't remember if that was in the 90s or early 2000s.
I think that was 2000s.
Okay, so that's disqualified.
Technically still counts.
But I will say on that one, Joe, 30 Days of Night at least saved us from that other sparkly movie that should not be named.
Yeah.
Because it brought vampires back.
Well, the 30 Days of Night comic book was in the 90s. I believe.
That's true. That's true.
I'm looking that up right now.
That's true.
And
and it's a great comic book.
Yeah,
too.
it was 2002.
The comic?
Still well within our time frame.
Well, I remember
but yeah, the art in that book.
Oh, it's fantastic.
Jonathan,
Go ahead, Jonathan.
I'm pretty sure it was either my first or second Dragon Con that I attended. John Carpenter was there partially to promote John Carpenter's Vampires, because it either had just come out or was about to come out. And I haven't seen that one in a while. I did buy it recently from Shout Factory because they had a big John Carpenter sale on his birthday. And I pretty much bought all of his movies that I didn't already own. but I haven't had a chance to rewatch it. But I do remember really enjoying it, and it kind of having a slightly new take on the vampire genre. But it's been long enough that I don't remember exactly what it was that was different about it. I mean, it was in the desert, and there was a lot of daytime stuff, I think, right?
Yeah.
I think so.
The main thing I remember is the main conceit that I thought was cool was that John Carpenter, the director, but James Woods led a Vatican-backed hit squad that all they did is they hunted down vampire nests.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
And that was pretty cool. And then the whole conceit of the movie is they go to this one nest, they think they cleared it out, but they missed the leader, and then he starts picking them all off.
Yeah.
The novel that the movie was based on, the name of which might just be Vampires, but I don't remember now. It's been a long time.
It is, but the S is a $sign.
Oh, thank you. Yes. They are contractors for hire, and towns that have a vampire problem hire them to come in and clean out the local nest. And the opening scene of the novel is sort of the cold open for their last case, where they're in the middle of burning out the vampire nest, and the town council has gathered to watch them do this to make sure that they finish the job. And he realizes that they're about to get screwed on the bill because the town council is going to try to cheap out on them. And it's such a fascinatingly mundane point to build the story from that I love it. It's so weirdly pragmatic.
Gary, is there anything that you wanted to cover that we've forgotten about? And we'll go around the horn. And is there any vampire thing that we haven't spoken of?
I'm checking to see when something was published. Okay, so the Dresden Files. The first book was in 2000, so it still counts. So sure. I want to say I love what Jim Butcher did by dividing the vampires up into different clans. There were the different courts. He had the Red Court, which they turn into these big rubbery looking bat things. There's the White Court, which feed off emotions, mainly sex, because it's easy to get that reaction out of humans. And then there was the Black Court, which are the traditional Stoker-style Dracula vampires, which, as Jim Butcher puts it, God, you guys must really hate that book because everybody knows how to fight and you've almost been wiped out.
What is the name of that one?
The Jim Butcher's Dresden Files series. The first one was Stormfront.
Okay.
But the vampires, I think, start popping up in the second or third one and stay a background plot line to the current day. I mean, the book that's about to come out. There's a huge faction war, like most modern fantasy, urban fantasy. There's a war on.
Yeah. Take it down a notch, guys.
Yeah. But I think we hit all the big movies that I wanted to really hit, or at least mention them. Like Grace Jones's Vamp is one I think that doesn't get enough love. Grace Jones is a vampire queen running her vampires out of a strip club.
Yep. She's playing herself then. That's
yeah.
And of course, Alyssa Milano's Embrace of the Vampire. Always a watch on Cinemax.
Was Queen of the Damned in the 90s? I know the book probably was.
The book was
for sure.
Yeah.
I haven't read the book, but I remember I remember thinking the movie was pretty good, and it was obviously, there was a whole thing with Aaliyah, I think, had died by the time the movie came out, and she was playing an undead character, so there was that whole weird dynamic.
Yep. As an Anne Rice book fan, I absolutely hate that movie.
The
soundtrack was really good.
Plus one.
But the soundtrack was phenomenal. I will definitely say that. I thought Stuart Townsend was a very terrible Lestat, but
plus one.
but I thought Aaliyah was fantastic as Akasha. I will give it.
Yeah, and also speaking of soundtracks, I want to give a shout out to the soundtrack From Dusk Till Dawn, which is full of great Tex-Mex rock and roll.
Yeah, I think the one that I would have to say is both something that I wanted to make sure I brought up and the thing that I went in with high hopes and was disappointed. was Aaron Spelling's short-lived TV show Kindred the Embraced, which is explicitly an adaptation of Vampire the Masquerade, the tabletop RPG. There's a lot about it that's actually very good and very creative, and you can see like a lot of effort went into making it. It is also sometimes hilariously awful, and there are lines from it that friends and I have said to each other to crack each other up for at least 20 years now. So, you know, it debuted at the same time as X-Files and was actually getting better ratings than the first season of X-Files. But then the lead died in a car accident and they didn't bring it back from hiatus. But it was a really, really interesting attempt to do a serious vampire horror show.
It was like Vampire Dynasty.
Ooh.
Yeah, basically. It's basically Vampires 90210. Which is true of almost every Vampire the Masquerade game. So in that sense, it's a very realistic depiction. You know?
Yeah.
And I say this as somebody with like multiple Vampire the Masquerade tattoos.
Nice.
So, you know.
At DragonCon, like you do, like has happened to everyone, I wandered into the middle of a Vampire the Masquerade LARP. And stuff was happening, and I thought, is this a Vampire the Masquerade LARP? Or just young people yelling at each other? It was both.
I
still love a picture I shared one time on Facebook. It was in the style of the Vampire the Masquerade book, with the green marble, but it's for the LARP. But it said, "Let's dress up and act petty."
At the website where I worked and eventually met Gary Mitchel, Zealot.com and Revolution SF, when that show came out, we got review copies on VHS. And because for whatever reason, I gave them away as prizes in one of our contests years and years ago at DragonCon. So I'm regretting it, Michael, that I don't have these copies.
I still own it on VHS. And I have a working VCR.
Nice.
You just have to come to North Carolina and we'll have a watch party.
Yeah, we're doing it.
Road trip.
Yep. And for me, and I did check the dates, Joe, just to make sure, but Buffy the Vampire TV series, I think, definitely deserves some discussion.
I feel like, we'd have to go a whole other hour for that.
Yes. But
two.
But yes, I love the show. I love the spinoff Angel, which came in right under the bell in 1999 it started. So, but the two of them, I mean, there were so many memorable characters. The Scooby Gang was fantastic. I thought I thought it was very well done, and you could see what Joss really wanted to do with Buffy, and the contrast between the film and the actual TV series. It was. It's night and day, but it's also they play well off of each other, I think.
Yeah, most people never get to revisit a thing that they attempted early in their career and then to do what they actually wanted to do with it.
Exactly.
And you see that in Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Me and my wife were a weekly viewers of that and Angel, and obsessed with it.
Yeah.
It also dug into the vampire mythology in such a way, like it really went after all the tropes and all the cliches and made them cooler.
Yeah.
But it also didn't. Now, of course, there's a whole lot of sexy vampire stuff in it, but also vampires are also gross and bad. They had everything.
The master with the Kool-Aid mouth. Yeah. I mean.
Yeah. But yeah.
There's a great line in an episode of Buffy where Giles says, when you meet a vampire that you once knew as a human, you are not seeing the person you loved. You're seeing the thing that killed them.
Mm-hmm.
And like that line right there has stuck with me for well over 2 decades.
Yeah.
That is, and the episode with Buffy and Dracula.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Especially at the end when he starts reforming, she's like, I'm right here.
Yep.
Because I just assumed, like probably everybody, okay, Dracula's the big bad of this season. Nope.
Right.
I absolutely love that.
And there really were some really amazing episodes. Lola in the comments actually mentioned one, The Body.
The Body.
Too soon.
Yeah. And just the way that they portrayed that with no music, nothing, just it was so it made you unnerved, and it made you feel what Buffy was feeling at the time. It was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I still have emotional scars from her daydream where she saves her mother, and then it flashes back to reality, and you realize it was her, and it's just like, Joss, you bastard.
Yeah.
Oh, and then an episode subsequent to that where they tease bringing their mother back, and it.
Oh God, yeah.
The horror, like the Halloween episode, I think.
Yeah.
I always love the Halloween episodes. Those were always fun. My favorite being the costume party where everybody was turning into their costume. And then at the very end, they summon the demon to fight it, and he's only this little, and they squish it, and Strauss says, "Oh, I missed this part. Actual size."
Yeah. There's so much good stuff in that show. And I would be remiss. Here's the one that we haven't discussed. That I assumed it would come up at some point, but I would like to mention a very important bit of vampire mythology to my upbringing, Count Chocula.
Oh, yeah.
That stuff is delicious. To this day, they bring it out in the special boxes in the Halloween season, and I get it. And I
like a pallet.
Yeah. I hoard it for a year until that and Booberry. But we're not talking about ghosts, Joe. Stay on topic.
Yeah.
But final thoughts? Were those final thoughts, guys? We could be here another hour doing this. But we thank you guys for coming. I feel like every time we do one of these, Gary, I think you agree. I feel like we should just be doing these every day.
Almost.
Because I love doing this. I love getting to talk to you guys, even if it's spread out over the course of months. The way we've been doing, I think this is if this is how we got to do it, we're going to crush it.
Yes.
So, why the heck?
I think I speak for Joe that if, and it's still if, DragonCon does not happen, Joe and I know I have personally still taken the PTO. So we'll just do panels all weekend online.
Yeah,
we can do that.
100%.
You can all come stay at my house, and we can do them all in the same room.
Hey, and there'll be booze.
Yeah, and my neighbors will cook for us.
We'll go hang out with your neighbors. Well, let's do this. Let's go.
They go to DragonCon every year.
Sweet.
There we go.
That was one of the things that we bonded over when I first moved in here a few months ago.
Sweet.
Cool. Well, let's go around and everybody reveal your linkage, and then I'll put all that up on the web and on the YouTube video and all that stuff. But Mr. JC Delatorre?
Yes, sir. The show is called Vampires of Whitechapel. It's available wherever you can find podcasts, so Apple Podcasts, all the normal podcast catchers. You can also go to vampiresofwhitechapel.transmissionsfromatlantis.com.
Go check it out.
Michael?
I'm Michael G. Williams. I'm a novelist. I write science fiction, horror, and urban fantasy. You can find out about all my books at michaelgwilliamsbooks.com, and you can follow me on Twitter as @McManlyPants.
Sorry, Michael.
Great. I love it.
I didn't name myself that so that everybody would think it was terribly serious.
It also works as a rap name.
It does.
MC Manly Pants.
You don't want me to try that, but it
MC Manly Pants. Yes.
Something to work on.
Classic track karaoke. It's coming.
MC Manly Pants.
Jonathan, where can people find you?
Yeah, Jonathan.
Let's see. You can go to my website, wrestlingwithpopculture.com, and I am co-host on the Pro Wrestling Roundtable podcast, which is PWR Spot Show on all social media. There's a Facebook group There's a Twitter. There's an Instagram. I think it's also under Palaver Podcast or something like that.
Oh, yeah.
Used to be part of Earth Station 1, but now it's its own thing. I guess that's it for me.
It's good stuff. And people can find me here on the Twitter at Gary Mitchel. Remember, it's just one L, and you can find me on our Facebook group. And I write my weekly Slip Discs article about what's new coming out on physical media every Tuesday. I try to put it up on Monday so you have it in advance to take with you to the store.
Nice. And on my at thing right here, why am I pointing there? There it is. Okay, there's my name. There, look at me. There's at Classic Track is us on that's us on the Instagrams. And you can follow our little thing on Instagram. We're also on the YouTube, which if you're watching this not live, like a couple of days after we posted, after we did it on Thursday, then you're watching it on YouTube right now. You're already there, guys.
Yeah.
It's the American Sci-Fi Classics page on YouTube. And also, however, on the Facebook, which if you're watching it live as it happens on Thursday, you're already there. So convenient. Facebook.com/groups/American Sci-Fi Classics. And if we forgot anything, which we probably did, leave us comments. We'll do this again.
These guys are idiots. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I do want to give a shout out to Beth Van Dusen and Ryan Schweck, who joined us from recording their own podcast, which is part of the Needless Things podcast group. And
of
so
course,
I'm sorry you guys were late.
We totally, much like Dragon Con, they were doing something cool, while that simultaneously we were doing something cool. So we didn't have time to do something cool together, but we'll do it again soon. Guys, thank you very, very much. We hope that we have given you roughly an hour and 17 minutes of relief from worries, your family, worries of
your worrying family.
Yeah. Bathing. We hope we've given you some relief from having to bathe for an hour and 17 minutes.
Just like Dragon Con.
Just
Exactly.
like, thank you.
Should we tell them what we're doing next week, Joe?
What are we doing?
Next week, we are doing alternate Avengers Assemble. What if the MCU movies were made in the 70s, the 80s, or 90s? So who would have been Iron Man if Iron Man had been made in 1978 instead of like 2008?
David Hasselhoff.
Please.
Please. We already know he got Nick Fury. So yeah, tune in that noted Avengers historian and brilliant guy all around, Van Allen Plexico, should be joining us.
Always fun. Thank you guys for hanging out with us. And we're now going to go venture into the night and crave human souls and Count Chocula. But
must be Thursday.
Must be Thursday. Thank you guys very, very much. For the American Sci-Fi Classics Track, and JC and Michael and Jonathan and Gary, I'm Joe. Thank you guys very much. We will see you very soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
We are creatures of the night.